I wrote the most terrifying story ever. It's probably too dangerous to read. Self-harm. I've wanted to be a horror writer since I first blew through 60 Goosebumps books in elementary school. As I got older, my interest quickly shifted to Christopher Pike, and then Stephen King and Dean Koontz. At first, my parents were thrilled that I was reading it all, but when my mom started catching on to exactly what I was reading, she got worried. "You're going to give yourself nightmares," she said, but I basically laughed in her face. Nothing scared me. It was all silly. Even Pennywise in it or Randall Flagg in The Stand just seemed like cartoons to me. At some point, I decided the only way to discover something genuinely scary was to write it myself. Of course, I went through all of the common pitfalls of a rookie writer, copying my idols, generating page after page of drivel. It wasn't until college that I actually started coming up with stories that didn't stink like hot garbage. Finally, when I was a senior, I wrote the first one that I was actually proud of. It was about a space station that ran out of food, and rescue is years away. The chief scientist calculates that he'll have just enough calories to make it in time, if he eats the rest of the crew. I was so excited to finally show it to someone that I emailed it to my girlfriend and asked her to tell me what she thought. I sent the email and then drove over to her place so I could hear her reaction in person. When I got there, she was in tears. I asked her if she liked the story, and she said that she couldn't even look at me, that I was disgusting. I told her to relax. It was just a story after all. But she just started screaming that there was something wrong with me and that I needed to get out of her house right then.
It was sad to lose her, but it didn't change how I felt about the story. I ended up sending it to a few magazines, but I didn't hear back. I guess I figured that it wasn't scary enough. And if I'm going to be honest, a bit of self-doubt was beginning to creep in. Maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe some kind of gauge had broken inside of me, such that my whole concept of terror was different from the rest of humanity. Maybe I should just stop writing and get an office job. A couple of months after that, I was lying awake at night when I felt something heavy on my chest. I looked down to see what was sitting there, but all I could make out was a shadow. "You're close," it said. "You can't hold back now." I woke up gasping. Of course, I took it as a sign. I started my next story that very morning. And if I'm going to be honest, this one felt different than anything I'd written before. It was like the monster I was writing about was embracing me from behind, curling its fingers around mine, guiding them on the keyboard. Then, it was like I blinked, and the whole thing was already written out on the page, a couple thousand words. I scrolled up in my doc, and it was like I was reading it for the first time. And as I went, I actually felt my body tensing, my pulse quickening. All of the stuff I'd read about in novels, but never actually experienced myself. I was actually afraid. Shaking, I quickly shut my computer screen. It was immediately apparent to me that I'd written a story scarier than anything I'd ever read, and since I'd read practically everything, there was a good chance it was the scariest story ever created. My first thought was to post it somewhere online for maximum exposure. I was just about to post it online when I hesitated. Maybe it would be better to run it by a few test readers first. I hadn't even really done a proper grammar check, after all. That afternoon, I went to my parents' house with a few printouts of the story. My parents were glad to see me, of course, but a little wary of reading my story. They exchanged a funny look, but ultimately agreed to give it a look. I waited downstairs as they each went to their upstairs study to read in the coziest chairs. The seconds ticked by painfully. I couldn't wait to hear what they thought. I imagined their pride as they realized that not only was their son a real writer, but that he'd actually written the scariest story ever. And then I heard a shattering of glass, followed by a thump. I ran outside to find my mother's body in a heap surrounded by fragments of the upstairs window, as well as my manuscript pages. I ran to her, trying to shake her awake, but found her completely lifeless. I was about to call 911 when I looked up and saw my father standing at the same window. He was shaking with fear as he picked a piece of broken glass from the window and ran it across his throat. Then, as the blood trickled down his neck, he fell lifelessly down, landing with a thump on top of my mom. I guess I should have been scared, but if I'm going to be honest, the sight of my dead parents was practically a walk in the park compared to the story. I felt sad seeing them like that, but not like I needed to scream bloody murder or anything. A bloody page blew out from under my mother's corpse and clung to my chest. I pulled it slowly off my body, and as I did, I reread one of the essays.